Just so you guys know, I'm wearing the flannel because it's quarantine and I have no other clean clothing. I do record these lectures like kind of around the same time that you guys watch them. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about science and the scientific process and what it is and what it means. And I'm going to give you kind of a case study of kind of how the scientific process works in real time. So your textbook talks about this gentleman here, Sir Francis Bacon. Uh, he is credited with sort of first like writing down the scientific method in a formal way, and that was a few hundred years ago, around 1600. Um, I personally grew up with a slightly different impression of science. I grew up with this guy, Bill Nye, with the whole science rules, and this is very exciting. But Bill's impression, at least on the TV show, is perhaps not the most accurate way of thinking about science either. It's not just a series of really cool experiments and explosions. It's really sort of a methodological, philosophical way of thinking about the universe. And science is often incredibly cool, but sometimes it's very dry and boring. So the truth is somewhere in the middle between Francis Bacon and Bill Nye. Um, The scientific method is a defined series of steps that include experiments and careful observation. If a hypothesis is not supported by data, a new hypothesis can be proposed, and that's all very wordy and stuff. And I kind of want you guys to know how this process works. Maybe this is intuitive to you. Maybe you have studied this before. Maybe you use this in your everyday life. But the scientific method always, my little pointer, always starts with an observation. You always make some observation about the world to start the scientific method. So it starts with an observation, always. That observation leads to a question. And we're going to go through a better, more real life example of this, by the way. So, Niece's car doesn't work. The question that I would ask is, well, is it not working because the batteries are dead? The hypothesis that answers that question is, well, if we are to change the batteries out, then the car will start working again, meaning that the car didn't work because the batteries were dead. The prediction then, and these predictions are often if-then statements. So if I change the batteries, the car will work. And that prediction is going to, or that experiment that comes from this prediction is going to either confirm or deny this hypothesis. So we do an experiment, switch the batteries out, we analyze the results, we start that toy car up. Does it work? Cool. We report our results. I go and I say, hey, Katie, car's working. It was the batteries. The car does not work. I definitely don't tell her about it because she'll lose her mind. So we go and we try something else. Maybe we need to change the remote's batteries. Maybe we need to run to Walgreens and get her a new car or whatever. Okay, so that's just kind of my little not not formal. Well, I guess it is formal, but this is not something that I'm not going to write about nature or write into nature about my niece's car not working, right? But you can use the scientific method every day. Sometimes it can be a bit redundant, but this is the process as it's written. And I actually disagree a little bit with this diagram, and I'll show you why in just a minute. So this group of scientists here, all these folks, and this was published, I think, in March of 2020, so this is some current science that's going on. What this group of researchers did is they started with an observation, because you always start with an observation, and they said, it appears that more people, at least in the area where we are sampling, are coming in with different amounts of susceptibility to coronavirus based on what their blood type is. So are you type A, are you type B, are you type O? And what sort of impact does that have on, are you going to get the coronavirus? And how severe is it going to be if you do get the coronavirus? And so their observation was, it appears, at least according to preliminary data, that people who are getting the coronavirus and are being hospitalized are more often of type A blood. They have type A blood more than any other type. And so their question was, and again, this can be a little redundant, but their question was, are people with different blood types, or do they have different amounts of susceptibility to the coronavirus? Their hypothesis then was, well, we think, you know, that they are going to have differences. They believed that their hypothesis was that people with type A blood are going to be more susceptible to coronavirus. And then their prediction followed that, and that was people with type A blood are more susceptible to coronavirus. Again, this can be redundant. It isn't always redundant, but it certainly can be. And their experiment then was to go find folks who are at hospitals, see sort of relatively, how sick they are. They looked at different markers in addition to just saying, hey, are you in the hospital for coronavirus? And hey, what's your blood type? The result that they got from this was that, hey, if you have type A blood, you're more likely to get coronavirus and you're more likely to get pretty sick from it as well. And so they reported this. They wrote to whatever journal it was, and they said, hey, look, it appears type A blood makes you more susceptible to coronavirus, which is really interesting and really cool. But there's a problem with this. So they followed all the steps of the scientific method, but then shortly thereafter, a paper came out in March of 2020 that says, no, actually, we looked at a bunch of people. We looked at 487 cases, and really type A blood doesn't make you more susceptible at all. Okay, and this is how like the process works very often. Pretty often you have people getting into little biology fights like this. And so, if you look at our original scientific method, there's nothing that can be done. If you go down to, oh, that covers it up, but if you go down to report results at the bottom of the screen there, you're just done. There's not anything that you can do, and this is sort of where the book cuts the process off, and that's not how it works. So what really happens is the hypothesis is not supported, and so you go back up to this try again stage. Because once you publish your research, pretty much everyone in your field, I won't say is going to be trying to tear it apart, but if there are problems with it, they're going to be found by other people in the community. And that is why peer review, that is why publishing these things to papers is so important. Because if this wasn't published to a paper, or if people weren't able to do confirmational research and say, hey, it's not true, then I would still be walking around thinking that type A blood makes you more susceptible. Because I read this paper when it came out and I thought, wow, that's awesome and wild. And also I have type B blood. And yeah, but now, it's very clear that I shouldn't be walking around thinking that I'm somehow resistant because I don't have that blood type, right? And so it doesn't just end with hypothesis. It's not, it doesn't just end with report results. Okay, those researchers need to go back, re-examine their data, maybe gather more data and figure out what went wrong. So the next thing I want to talk about is what was their theory? What was either of those researchers' theory? And maybe you could pause it for a second and think about this question, or write it down, what you think their theory was. Give you a couple more seconds. Just awkwardly sit here. So they didn't have a theory. Okay, some of their work was based on theoretical predictions having to do with what are called moieties and antibodies, and we're not going to get into the specifics. Some of their data was, or some of their science was based on theory, but they didn't have a theory. Okay, and that's a very important point I want to make here. Theory is a term that people use conversationally every day, but theory means something entirely different in science than it means conversationally. And by the way, I'm not saying you're like a bad person if you say theory all the time. I do it pretty regularly, oh, I have a theory about why the TV isn't working or whatever thing. And we're just using it wrong, and that's okay. So in science, theory means something that has been repeatedly confirmed again and again by experimentation. So theories are true in that sense. Theories also explain a number of natural phenomena. Um, and so theories in science are these sort of large explanative, is explanative a word? These large ideas that help us to explain the world. So plate tectonics is a theory. The idea that you live on giant plates that are moving all the time is a theory. Um, what else is a theory? The idea that germs or tiny microscopic organisms cause you to get sick is a theory. Okay, so like the idea that a virus can make you sick is theoretical. It's a theory. And the big one, the one that people sometimes get stuck on, is evolution is a theory. And we're going to talk about, again, I mentioned this in the previous lecture, we're going to talk about the evidence for evolution later on. But if anybody comes to me this semester and says evolution isn't true because it's only a theory, I'm not going to take points or anything, but I'm definitely going to be really annoyed. Okay, so what did we talk about in that lecture? Um, we mostly talked about the scientific method, and I gave you an explanation of it using actual science that is really happening, really relevant right now, and sort of a little tiny tidbit about how the peer review process works. And I also talked about the fact that a theory is not the same thing as a hypothesis. Okay, so if I have a theory about why my car won't start, it's not a theory, it's just a hypothesis. And I'm just using the term colloquially or in normal conversation.